163 years ago, there was a speech given right here on this very battlefield that almost every American can at least quote the first four words. 77 years ago. Today we are here on that great battlefield and we're pondering the question, have we lived up to the words, the proposition, and the Gettysburg Address? Welcome back to History with Waffles. Today we're in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and we're not out here to talk about the battle itself or the different engagements around the town or even the civilians that were here. What we're here to do is recite a speech. A speech that's so famous that not only do Americans recite it from memory, but people from around the world can recite it from memory. This speech at the time, the Gettysburg Address, would go on to be one of the most famous speeches in the history of our country. And those words, just so few of them, would represent a snapshot in time of what was going on here in this country. But more so today on our 250th anniversary, I think it kind of represents who we are. We're a nation of constant change, constant growth, and eventually coming together, just like we will be on the 4th of July to celebrate this country. So I'm going to recite that speech in a few places here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And I hope you'll sit back and listen and reflect on what it means to be an American, to be a citizen of this country, all the people that have sacrificed their lives to give us these freedoms that we have, to allow us to do what we do here in this country, and how very lucky we are for all of those who came before us. So sit back and enjoy. Before the American Civil War, this country had been arguing with itself for quite some time. There were arguments about a lot of things. What really did the Constitution mean? Was there such a thing as a separation, sort of a clause in there, if you will, if you can separate from the Union, if you're unhappy with your federal government? You see, the federal power wasn't looked at the same as it is today. And these men were bickering with each other constantly over this. And another big point of argument was American slavery. They were fighting whether or not they can enslave other people, or at least expand the slavery into other states that were popping up in this new union. This country was stretching, growing, and was trying to figure itself out. And there were constant changes. And at that time, there were a lot of people resistant to those changes. Fast forward to the election. Abraham Lincoln is just a candidate. But he's a candidate that a lot of people are worried about because they believe that he's an abolitionist, that his party is an abolitionist party. And a lot of Southern politicians at the time do not want him in office. One of the main reasons is they are afraid that they're not going to be able to only to expand slavery into those other states, but that they're not going to be able to have it in the states that they are currently in. When that election goes down, it becomes real clear that the electorate doesn't need the southern states to elect a president. And for those states, that's a red flag. Not only do they not feel represented in that election, but they also fear that there's going to be some major changes coming real soon. And so secession starts to happen. Lincoln sends supplies and reinforcements to Fort Sumter. The Southerners that are around there know exactly what this is. It isn't a simple supply route. This is what they consider a declaration of war. So they fire on Fort Sumter. The headlines in the papers show that the Southern forces fired first, that the Southern forces are declaring war. So it builds up the fighting machine for the Union Army, and Lincoln calls for 75,000 men. With that, there's no going back. Fast forward to 1863. The Union Army has been getting its tail stomped in almost every angle in the East. The West is a little bit of a different story. They have a different general out there that's in charge of things. But here in the East, they just can't quite figure it out. And not too long before this battle here in Gettysburg, Chancellorsville becomes an all-time nightmare for the Union Army. But it seems like during that war, that just in the nick of time, the right man for the job shows up. Enter General George Gordon Meade. George Gordon Meade has a huge task on his hand here in Gettysburg. And he's up for the task, whether he knows it or not. And so are his officers. Across this field here, directly behind me, on the 3rd day of July, today, almost 15,000 Confederate soldiers will come across that field to try to break these Union lines here. 2 days earlier, thousands of soldiers, both north and south, have been killed and wounded out here on these fields, and their bodies are laying all across the entire place. Can you imagine standing out here on that day, seeing not only the dead and wounded laying on these fields, but the thousands of gray and butternut coming across those fields towards this line where I'm at right now? It's amazing. Abraham Lincoln's not supposed to be the primary speech giver here, even though he's the President of the United States. And that's not something typical, even today. If the President shows up, he's the biggest name on the docket, he better come with a good speech. Edward Everett, on the other hand, gives a very lengthy speech. And I don't think anybody even remembers the first 4 words of that speech. You'd have to be a scholar to remember that. But every common citizen in this country can at least recite 77 years ago. And they know exactly what we're talking about. Here we are on a muddy day in 1863. Soldiers have paraded through the town. Citizens have been digging graves, pulling bodies from the fields. And just over my shoulder here, there's a cemetery where they've been placing them. A makeshift stage is made. Abraham Lincoln stands up, and his speech is so quick that when the photographer tries to take a photograph of him giving that speech, all he catches is the man sitting down at the top of his head with his hat off. And here is the Gettysburg Address. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I hope you've enjoyed this small video. Try not to make it too lengthy, because it's really more about the speech itself, the breaking down of the speech. You have to listen to the words and think about them as you're listening to them. Abraham Lincoln is not just giving a speech to honor dead men. He's talking about this nation being reborn into a new concept. He's also talking about whether or not this nation can actually survive, whether it can be the beacon of hope for democracy, and whether any nation conceived the way that we were can last. He's talking about an enduring legacy for all time. So today, I asked the question at the very beginning of this: have we lived up to those words? Well, that's up to each and every American out here. It's up to you to live up to those words. Help your neighbors. Volunteer often. Reach out to your communities. Help a friend in need. Serve your country and dedicate yourself to the proposition that all men are created equal, and that the men here that fought and died on this field and many other battlefields around the world, that they did not die in vain. Pay it back. Pay it forward. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.
If tomorrow the sun rises on these fields of gold, and the highways glow at dawn, there'll be a farmer in the cold morning air, and a trucker rolling on. From a small town diner to the factory line, you can hear the same quiet prayer, that the freedom we hold was hard to find, and we'll always keep it there. And I'm proud to stand in this land I love, where the brave heart still holds strong, where the red, white, and blue still waves up high over towns where we belong. From the mountains tall to the open plains, to the waves of the shining sea, there are dreams still alive in these open fields for you and me. There's a soldier far from the ones he loves, watching stars in a distant sky, and a mother at home saying one more prayer for the day he walks inside. There's a teacher and a nurse working late tonight, and a builder getting things done. Different roads but a common truth, this is where we're from. And I'm proud to stand in this land I love, where the brave heart still holds strong, where the red, white, and blue still waves up high over towns where we belong. From the mountains tall to the open plains, to the waves of the shining sea, there are dreams still alive in these open fields for you and me. We didn't build this land alone. Every hand helped raise these stones. Through the trials and the tears we've known, still the light of freedom shows. So I'll stand up proud for this land I love, for the price it took to be free, for the ones who served and the ones who gave all they had for you and me. From the small town roads to the city lights, there's a promise for all to see. As long as that flag still flies in the wind, this will always be